Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. And today's opinions will be about Taste of Marrow by Sarah Gailey. So this is the sequel to that little murderous hippo book that I read not too long ago. And yeah, this was a fun follow-up to a fun little concept book. So this book does start up not too long after the first one ended, and so, like with all sequels, be prepared, there will be some spoilers in my review of this book for the first book, which is called River of Teeth. If you haven't read River of Teeth, I do suggest you go out, buy it, read it, watch my review of that one, then watch my review of this one, so that, you know, you're not spoiled for that first book. But also, so you get to see all my reviews. But this book follows our heroes from last time, separated by fate and an exploding dam. When the last book ended, Hero was severely injured, and they and Adelia have been separated from the rest of the group. Now, they presume Houndstooth and the others are dead, and so they're just sort of keeping Adelia company until they recover from their wounds, and Adelia recovers from giving birth. When the pair are attacked out of nowhere by a group of men who seem determined to kidnap Adelia's baby, they ride off together to try to save the infant. Meanwhile, Houndstooth is obsessed with finding Hero. He is sure they are alive, even though Archie certainly does not agree, and truthfully there are no signs that Hero survived, but I'd also point out that there are no signs that Hero died either, so it's a fair thing to be obsessed with. Now Archie is just trying her best to keep her friend from destroying himself in his obsession, all while trying to reconnect with her lost love, Carter, the U.S. Marshal who they've sort of lost contact with, and who is on a search for Adelia, for a completely different reason. Because Adelia is a famously wanted murderer. She is an assassin, and so he's trying to hunt her down for the law, while the others are trying to hunt her down to find Hero. Can they all find each other? And if so, will they survive once they do? Okay, so overall, I will say this is a really solid little sequel. It is little, it's short. Like its predecessor, it is just a novella, and it's under 200 pages. And generally, I find that it felt like it was the right length for what it was. Like, it managed to squeeze in 4 solid character arcs, a lot of action, a good bit of interesting theming, and some seriously entertainingly silly ideas. And amazingly, I would say that it never really felt rushed to me. If anything, there were a few bits that sort of felt a bit overly long-winded. Like, in particular, the struggle of Winslow Houndstooth, while immensely entertaining, stayed really stagnant for the first half of this book. It was all just him being an emotional wreck, Archie worrying about him, and him messing with maps. And it's mostly the maps. Like, every time we see him, he's obsessively staring at and flipping through maps. And I'm really not sure what the hell he was doing with all of them. There's only so much you can learn from staring at a map. And he was literally just staring at them and moving around. And at one point he was drawing lines on them. And I'm like, okay, cool. And like, we do find out after the fact that he was doing other things, but we don't see him doing all those other things. So it all just feels really stagnant. Like, that's the word that comes to mind. And then you add in the fact that, minor spoiler for this book here, but the characters end up coming together partially just out of luck. And like, I like the fact that a lot of their bringing it together was just luck, because yeah, that does feel realistic to me, and also sort of does have some theming for like the idea of like whatever you're struggling towards, the universe is going to throw something else at you. But it really undercut all of Houndstooth's journey, and it was a somewhat stagnant journey to begin with, so I feel like that part didn't quite work as well as it should. Otherwise, I will say the plotting, the progression of the narrative in this book is wonderfully done. It flows really well. We spent the exact right amount of time in active pursuits and the exact amount of time with like the characters just having stuff happen to them. And like, there's a lot of really fun action, but it's also heavily interspersed with quieter moments, moments of introspection, of thinking, of, you know, emotionally working through their trauma, which I really like, and I think was actually very important for this book. There's also a Deus Ex Hippopotamus, which is fun. But I don't know, it's just a really well-plotted story. And as mentioned, I really liked the character arcs in this book. I feel like they were incredibly well handled. And to me, it's really important that they were well handled because there was just the right amount of time to build something new on the structure of what was there in the first book. Because, like, I really liked the characters that were introduced in the first book, but I will admit they were sort of a little bit sketchy. Like, we knew who they were emotionally. There was not that much backstory. It sort of felt like the equivalent of really simple animations when you get the very simple lines, but somehow those really simple lines give you so much emotion and so much clarity as to who is who. And this book really was, in many ways, about filling in the details, adding the colors between the lines, giving us more on who these people are, both emotionally and a little bit more like actual literal backstory kind of things. And I feel like that's a really good place for this sequel to go. And it gave it just enough difference from the first book that it felt like there is a valid reason for this book to exist beyond just continuing the story. And it made it more entertaining for me. And also, like, I love a slightly more introspective, character-focused work, but I personally really want there to still be action and drama. Like, I don't like books that take place entirely in characters' heads. And for me, this one had a really good mix and match of, like, active action scenes and more quiet, emotional introspection scenes. And I think that the two together create a much more cohesive character arc for all the characters. With one caveat here. I will say that it sort of left the characters that were introduced in this part of the story a little bit lacking. And there aren't that many of them. Most of the characters that are introduced here are, you know, either continuous characters from the first book, or they are, like, passing side characters we'll never see again. But there's one who pops up over and over again named Acadia, and she seems really interesting. I really wanted to know more about her. She, like, feels cool, and like there are a lot of passing references here and there that make it clear that there is more going on with her. Like, there are a couple of moments where people talk about how familiar she looks, and that's great, but it felt very barely fleshed out. Like, it didn't even really feel like a full sketch. To me, what she really felt like throughout the entire book was sequel bait. Like, I thought that either she was going to become a much bigger part of the story, and don't get me wrong, she is in the story a lot, but she's not actively pushing the story forward. She's just sort of there a lot, and so it sort of feels like it's setting up for another book. And, like, I have no idea if Sarah Gailey is writing another book in this world or not, but it sort of felt like if there is another book in this world, it's gonna be about Acadia. Also, there's a moment in the end of this book that I'm not entirely sure why she's there. And this honestly might have been something I missed in the narrative. Because I will admit, I don't remember River's Teeth as well as I thought I did when I started to pick this one up. But there was a moment when Acadia does something that is immensely dangerous and that the narrative really draws our attention to it happening. And it feels really like it's going to be one of those things that's super important, and I have no idea why she did it. I don't know how it's important. And so all of these things together make me feel like maybe there is going to be another book, and it's going to focus around Acadia, but either way, like, the first book really felt like a complete entity to me. Like, I knew there was a second one. I was excited for a second one because there is a little bit of a cliffhanger at the end of that one. Just the cliffhanger of, you know, will Hero and Houndstooth ever find each other again? But it felt like a complete enough narrative that I was okay if I never got the second book. Whereas this one, the Acadia stuff feels too sequel baity to me. Like, it feels like there's not enough resolution in this book with her for it to make sense what she's doing here. And so if there's not another book, I'll be slightly annoyed. And even if there is another book, I'm like, okay, but I wanted more solidity with her. And also, I will admit there are some whys to the plot that don't quite feel fully realized to me. Like, why did Parrish need it to be Adelia when he seemed to have his target pretty much entirely in his control? Like, I don't want to reveal too much of what's going on because it is a bit of spoilerific, but there's this big plot that's building up and that it has to be Adelia, and I'm like, why? Why are you going out of your way to try to basically blackmail a woman who is immensely dangerous into doing this for you when it really feels like anyone could have done it. And like, why exactly was Houndstooth writing letters to people all over the country rather than just like riding around on his hippo and searching physically? And like, there's also the question of why Adelia took Hero in the first place. And like, that is one of the central questions of the book. Like, this does actively get asked multiple times. And I feel like I emotively know why. Like, it makes sense for her character arc, but it doesn't quite have the direct on-page explanation that I sort of wanted it to. And mainly because there are a couple of different reasonings that could go on here. And I think part of this is I don't quite remember whether or not Adelia actually knew at the end of River of Teeth if Houndstooth and Archie are alive. And if she does, then the entire character arc for her in this one is drastically different than if she doesn't. And either way, it just feels a little bit unresolved that they never directly have that conversation of why. But the other whys feel a little bit more like just the plot needed them a little bit more explained, and that one feels a little bit more like the emotions needed it explained. And like I said, it is one of those that sort of feels like I emotionally know, but logically I don't know. And for once, that's a dissonance that really bothered me. There's also similar sort of things with the world building, and it's sort of stupid. When I read these books, none of the world building bothered me. Like, I acknowledge that some of it's really soft, some of it is very hand-wavy, you're expected to just sort of accept some things and move on, but I did. And part of it is because the story's fun, the characters are fun, it's pulling you along, it's not giving you a lot of time to stop and think about the world building, but there are some things that when you stop and think about them make not a lick of damn sense. And I will admit, the more time I spend in the world, the more even the things that are that I suspect other people would be able to be hand-waved past, it bothered me. Like, as a direct example here, hippos aren't carnivorous. Like, yeah, they do kill people. They kill a buttload of people. They don't eat them. And the sheer number of hippos eating people in these books don't feel like they have the logical explanation it needs to make it make sense. And like, there is some sort of subtle implication throughout both books that the reason the hippos are going after humans is because there's not enough food around for them to eat, like their natural vegetation. But I feel like it just needed to be directly stated. It needed to be directly said. The hippos have eaten all the food they can in the South, and that's why they're starting to eat people. And also, it's mentioned in passing the American breed of hippo, which does imply that these have been bred enough that they are not like African hippos. And, like, that sort of works, and, like, I feel like it could be used, though that always brings me to the question of, like, but it takes a lot of generations to make that big of a difference between like, a, native, actual, wild breed and a domesticated breed. And then another few generations to have that feral breed go out and do its own damn thing. And I don't think we've had enough generations here of hippos. And I might be wrong here, but I feel like hippo generations are not short. They are like 40 years. And so like, there's a lot of logic to the hippos that I'm not entirely sure makes 100% sense. But all of it is the sort of thing that when I was reading, I didn't really care. It is sort of just fun, and you're just going, okay, sure, whatever. But similar things with, like, the themes. There are a good number of really interesting themes that are brought up here that didn't get fully realized in this book. Like, we're beginning to start an interesting conversation about the concept of invasive species, and, like, what is the moral thing to do about invasive species, and, like, humans destroying our environment to make it more suitable to our lives, about wealthy men wildly disregarding human life around them, about capitalism killing people. All these are interesting themes that get brought up and then just sort of don't have a solid resolution in the end. And like, the hippos show up and eat everyone without quite achieving the thematic resonance that they did in book one. Because, like, real direct spoilers for the end of book one, the big bad guy in book one gets eaten by hippos, and that is perfectly thematically resonant because he has not cared about other people being eaten by hippos. He's fed people to hippos, and he specifically was happy to spread the hippos everywhere so that his empire of you know, hippo-eating casinos would spread. So it was really thematically resonant for him to get killed by hippos. And while we do have the fun moment of a guy that we don't really like getting eaten by hippos here, it does not feel like the natural comeuppance for his crimes. Also, this next one, there will be some spoilers here. I'm trying my best to avoid it, but there's some logic here that needs a little bit of spoiling. Parrish is one of the bad guys in this book, and I can't get over the fact that he's right. Like, yeah, some of the hippos in this book are really likable. The ones that belong to our individual characters themselves develop characters. The author has really put in the time to personify these hippos, to make them feel like pets, to make them feel beloved. And we definitely don't want to see them killed. But the feral hippos? They're eating folks left, right, and center. Like, they are a problem. They are destroying boats. They are invading new territory all the time. And, like, the environmentalist in me is saying they would destroy the entire ecosystem of the South. And it just makes more sense to eradicate them. And, like, yeah, there was some acceptance in book one that we're eradicating the feral hippos. And then Parrish comes along saying, like, I think we need a military reason to come in and eradicate all the hippos in the South. And I can't help but agree with him. He's right. And, like, the plan in the first book of, like, sending in a ragtag group of outlaws to eradicate the ferals in the Harriet, like, that was already a questionable idea, but the idea that not sending in the military after that went wildly wrong is absurd. Of course you want to send in the military. And yeah, he's a bad guy, he's an asshole, he's going about this really the wrong way, but he's right. And, like, that really makes it a little bit harder for me to find the resonance with him getting eaten by hippos. And, it's just... It also draws attention to the logical question of, like, why the hell isn't Houndstooth getting in trouble for how badly things went in book one? Because, like, literally, he's on a government assignment and manages to basically cause an environmental disaster. And, yeah, it is stated in passing that there's a presumption that everyone who was involved died. But he's wandering around and he's not being subtle. Someone's going to notice that he's still here, especially considering there's a passing reference that he has the money from the first caper. So it's like, dude, like, why isn't somebody getting mad at him? And, like, there's just a lot of little world building things like that that just don't really get any explanation. And here's the thing. The entire time I was reading the book, it never bothered me once. I never thought about it. I was just like, yep, this makes sense. This is fine. This is cool. I'm sure we'll get an explanation later if I think about it at all. And it's only when I go back and try to talk about it and think about it in depth later that I'm like, oh my god, there are so many holes in the story. And to me, that's fine. It's like a really bad, silly action movie. You don't have to have it make perfect sense. There are plenty of other ways that action movies could go. They don't need to explode the vault to steal the money. But they do, because it's fun. And similarly, is there any logical reason that they're doing what they are with the hippos? Not really. But who cares? It's fun. So, like, this is one that I am a little bit like, it's okay that the world building is a little bit wishy-washy. At least to me. And I think part of that is because the characters, like I said, I really like the characters. I really like what they're doing with the characters. I really like the evolution of the characters. But also, the writing itself is fun. It's playful. It's light. It's enjoyable to read. It's really quick to read. And it has some interesting themes. And, like, even if they aren't fully realized, they're doing interesting enough things that I'm willing to ignore the fact that the world building is often highly flawed. There is one more thing that I really want to talk about, though, and that's the violence. Because if there's one thing this book and its predecessors did spectacularly, it's violence. The violence in these books are clear, perfectly well written, so that like I could picture every single movement, every single blood spurt, every thump of knives into flesh. There's a weight to the violence in these books that I don't usually see in books. It felt heavy, it felt real, it felt gruesome in the right ways without ever really feeling gratuitous. Like, it didn't feel like the author was just trying to see if she could make me flinch. It felt like it was there for a purpose, and all the purpose really feels thematically relevant. It's all about showing the character's mental state, showing how much tarnish there is on their souls, and it's immensely effective because the violence is so well written. And I think, like, the scene with Adelia pulling a man's tooth out with her bare hands will stick with me for a really long time. And part of it is just, it is well enough written that it's very clear in my mind, but also it is so effectively used to physicalize the struggle at the heart of the book. The struggle of what turns a person into a monster, where is that line, and if you cross the line into monster, can you come back, and how do you come back? And that is a theme that is more heavily explored in this book and really does feel like it is going somewhere and does have some resolution. So overall, everything else sort of comes out in the wash. But overall, I'd say this is a fun little book. As long as you don't think about it too deeply, you will enjoy it a lot. It's got a lot of diverse, interesting characters. It's a fun read. I cannot stress to you enough. It's literally just fun to read. And I feel like the silliness, the quickness of the prose, the witty lines, the playful imagery, all of it is enough to lighten these really heavy themes and give me at least the mix that I need to enjoy digesting them. And also, it is possibly one of the most cinematic books I've read in years. Like, if you were to ask me, what book of all the books I've read in the last couple of years do I want to see a movie of? It's River of Teeth and Taste of Marrow. These would be spectacular Netflix miniseries. And not just because they would be visually stunning, but also just because it feels like that kind of fast-paced action with just enough, character building in between. It feels like a movie. And so, yeah, I will say, across the board, I do recommend these books, even though, yeah, they have flaws. They're fun. Just don't think about them too much. They're basically be gay, do crime, and let the hippos eat the capitalists. So of course I'm gonna like them.